The first thing my husband did was smile when he told me another woman was coming to our house for a romantic dinner. He was standing in our kitchen, uncorking a bottle of wine I had bought for our anniversary, and he said it so casually that for a second I thought I had misunderstood him. "Her name is Vanessa," he said. "She knows about you. She knows about our marriage. I think once you meet her, you'll understand why I've been unhappy." I stared at him across the kitchen island, my hand still wrapped around the coffee mug I'd been holding. I didn't throw it. I didn't cry. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply asked, "What time is she coming?" My husband, Daniel, looked almost relieved. 7. Then he smiled again and added, "And please don't make this awkward." That was the moment something inside me went completely quiet. Because Daniel wasn't asking me to forgive an affair. He wasn't even asking me to leave. He was asking me to sit at my own dining table and watch him replace me. What he didn't know was that when Vanessa walked through our front door that night, she wasn't going to find the woman he thought he had broken. She was going to find someone who had already started putting the pieces together. My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 35 years old, and for 11 years, I believed I knew exactly who my husband was. Daniel and I met in Raleigh when I was 24 and he was 27. He was funny, confident, ambitious, and the kind of man who remembered small things. He once drove 40 minutes during a thunderstorm because I'd mentioned that I was craving a particular pie from a bakery near his office. I married that man. At least I thought I did. We bought our house 8 years ago, built our routines around Sunday breakfasts and Friday night dinners, and spent years telling friends that we weren't interested in having a perfect marriage. We just wanted a real one. I worked as a project manager for a medical supply company in Charlotte, while Daniel ran a small commercial construction business. 4 years we earned roughly the same amount. Then my career changed. I received a promotion, my salary jumped, and suddenly I was paying a larger share of the mortgage. Daniel congratulated me at first. But gradually, his congratulations became jokes. "Looks like I'm married to the boss now," he'd say. Then the jokes became comments about my clothes, my late meetings, and how much time I spent around successful men at work. I ignored it because I thought marriage meant giving someone room to have a bad season. I didn't realize his bad season had already turned into a secret life. The first warning came 3 months before that dinner. Daniel started coming home later than usual. When I asked about it, he always had an answer ready. Delayed inspection. A difficult client. Supplier meeting. Then one Thursday, I found a receipt in his jacket from a hotel in uptown Charlotte. The date was a Tuesday, the same night he told me he'd been working at a construction site 40 minutes outside the city. When I asked him about it, he didn't hesitate. "I needed somewhere quiet to finish paperwork," he said. I wanted to believe him, so I did. Or at least I pretended to. 2 weeks later, while Daniel was in the shower, his phone lit up on the kitchen counter. I wasn't searching through it. I wasn't looking for anything. But the message appeared on the screen anyway. "I can't wait until Friday. She has no idea." The sender was Vanessa Reed. I stood there staring at those 6 words until the screen went dark. My first instinct was to wake Daniel up from the shower and demand the truth. Instead, I put the phone exactly where he'd left it. That night I barely slept. The next morning I did something different. I called my older sister, Megan, who worked as a legal assistant for a family law attorney in Charlotte. I didn't tell her everything. I simply asked what a woman should do if she suspected her husband was hiding financial information and possibly another relationship. Megan went silent for a few seconds. Then she said, "Claire, don't confront him yet. Start documenting everything." So I did. I saved copies of our bank statements. I photographed the hotel receipt. I checked our joint credit card account and found 2 restaurant charges I didn't recognize, a jewelry purchase, and a payment to a private event venue near Lake Norman. Then I found something that made my stomach drop. 3 weeks earlier, Daniel had transferred $12,500 from our joint savings into a separate business account without telling me. When I asked him about the missing money, he said it was for equipment. But when I checked the transaction history, I discovered part of that money had gone to a woman named Vanessa Reed. That was when I understood something terrifying. Friday's romantic dinner wasn't an impulsive decision. Daniel had been preparing for it. He had been moving money, hiding messages, and building a story about our marriage while I was still trying to save it. And then, at 7 o'clock on Friday night, he expected me to open the door for the woman he planned to replace me with. He had no idea that I had already decided exactly who would open that door. By Friday afternoon, I had stopped asking myself whether Daniel was cheating. Already knew. The question that mattered now was why he was so confident that I would simply accept it. At 3:15, I sat in my car outside a coffee shop in Southend and met Megan. She had brought the name of an attorney she trusted, a woman named Laura Bennett, and a thin folder that suddenly felt heavier than it looked. "Don't tell him what you know," Megan said. "Let him keep talking. People reveal more when they think they're in control." I nodded, but my hands were cold. I wasn't planning some dramatic revenge. I wanted something more important. I wanted to know exactly what Daniel had been doing behind my back before I made one decision that could change the rest of my life. Laura looked through the copies of the bank statements, the hotel receipt, the messages, and the $12,500 transfer. She didn't gasp. She didn't judge me. She simply asked questions. How long had we owned the house? Who had made the mortgage payments? Were there other accounts? Had Daniel ever used joint money for personal expenses? I answered everything I could. Then she asked, "Do you want to save your marriage?" I stared at the table. That question hurt more than I expected. Because despite everything I'd found, some part of me was still hoping Daniel would wake up and become the man I'd married. "I don't know," I admitted. Laura closed the folder. "Then don't make that decision today. Protect yourself first." Those words stayed with me. Protect yourself first. On the drive home, I realized something else. Daniel wasn't just bringing Vanessa into our marriage. He was testing how much humiliation I would tolerate. If I accepted Friday's dinner, he would know he could push me farther. If I protested emotionally, he could call me jealous, unstable, or insecure. So I decided not to give him either reaction. I would let him believe he had one. 5:02 Daniel texted me. "Vanessa will be here at 7. Please be civil tonight. I don't want another argument." I read the message twice. Another argument. As if I had spent the week screaming at him. I replied with only 3 words. "I'll be here." He sent back a thumbs-up emoji. That tiny emoji made me angrier than anything else he'd said. He was comfortable. He believed I had nowhere to go. He believed the house, the marriage, and my emotions were all still under his control. He was wrong. At 5:40, I called his mother, Susan. Daniel had always been protective of the story he told his family. According to him, our marriage had become difficult because I was too focused on my career. He had never mentioned Vanessa. He certainly hadn't mentioned the money. Susan agreed to meet me at a small diner near Matthew's. When she arrived, she was smiling until she saw my face. "Claire, what's wrong?" she asked. I slid one printed bank statement across the table. Her eyes moved down the page, then stopped. "What's this?" she whispered. "Ask Daniel," I said. He told me the money was for equipment. It wasn't. I showed her the transfer to Vanessa's account. Susan's expression changed completely. She sat back and covered her mouth with one hand. "He told me he was struggling with a business," she said. "He said you didn't understand how much pressure he was under." "Maybe he was under pressure," I said. "But he was spending our money on her." Susan looked at me for a long moment. "Does he know you found this?" "No," she shook her head slowly. "Then don't tell him yet." I almost laughed. She had just repeated Megan's advice without knowing it. Before we left, Susan asked what I planned to do. I looked at the clock. It was almost 6:30. "I'm going home," I said. "I'm going to be there when Vanessa arrives." Susan reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Claire, whatever happens tonight, don't let him make you believe this is your fault." I drove home with those words in my head. At 6:52, I changed into a simple black dress, not because I wanted to impress Vanessa, but because I refused to look like someone who had been defeated. Then I put the folder Laura had given me into a drawer in the hallway. I checked that my phone was charged. I sent Megan a quick message telling her I was home. Then I waited. At 6:58, Daniel came downstairs wearing the shirt I had bought him for our anniversary. He looked at me and stopped. "You're actually staying?" he asked. "Of course," I said. "You invited someone to my house." He looked almost annoyed. "Claire, please don't make this difficult." Smiled. "I'm not." Then, at exactly 7:06, headlights swept across the living room curtains. Daniel glanced toward the window. His confidence returned immediately. "That's her." He walked toward the front door, smoothing his shirt as if he were preparing to greet a date. I stayed where I was. He reached for the handle. Then he paused. "One last thing," he said without turning around. "Whatever happens tonight, don't embarrass me." I almost smiled, because he still didn't understand. I wasn't the person who needed to worry about embarrassment. The doorbell rang. Daniel opened the door. Vanessa stood on the porch holding a bottle of expensive wine and a small gift bag. She smiled at him, then looked past his shoulder and saw me. Her smile disappeared. "Claire," she whispered. Daniel turned around. "You know her?" "Yes." Vanessa looked at him, confused. "Of course I know who she is. You told me she wouldn't be here." Daniel's face went pale. And then Vanessa said something that made me realize this dinner was only the beginning. "Daniel, you said tonight was supposed to be about us." For the first time since I had discovered Vanessa's name, Daniel looked genuinely afraid. Not embarrassed. Not angry. Afraid. He glanced at Vanessa, then at me, as if he were trying to figure out which lie would save him first. "Vanessa, this isn't what it looks like," he said. She gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "You told me your wife would be gone." I watched his face change. He had prepared an entire story for her, just as he had prepared one for me. Apparently, I was supposed to be the difficult wife who had become obsessed with her career, while Vanessa was supposed to be the woman who finally understood him. I stepped closer to the doorway. "Why don't you ask him where the $12,500 went?" Vanessa looked at Daniel. "What is she talking about?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Claire, stop." "No," I said calmly. "You wanted honesty tonight. Let's have it." Vanessa looked between us. "Daniel, what money?" He didn't answer. That silence told her more than anything I could have said. She slowly put the wine bottle down on the entry table. "You told me you were separated." Daniel shook his head. "I said we were basically finished." "That's not what you said." Her voice was quieter now. "You said the house was going to be mine someday." I felt something inside me go cold. The house. So that was part of the plan. He hadn't simply been cheating. He had been promising my life to someone else. I looked at him. "You told her that." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "I was going to fix everything. By spending our savings." "Yes." "By moving money into an account I didn't know about?" He said nothing. Vanessa took a step backward. "Daniel, you told me you were buying equipment for your business." "I was," he muttered. "Then why did money go to me?" she asked. He looked at her, then at me. There was nowhere left for him to hide. Vanessa picked up her purse. "I'm leaving." "Vanessa, don't." She looked at him with disgust. "Whatever you told me about Claire, I don't want to hear it anymore." She walked down the steps without looking back. Daniel closed the door slowly. For a few seconds, the house was completely silent. Then he turned toward me. "You had no right to involve my mother. You had no right to use our money. You went behind my back." I almost laughed. "Daniel, you brought another woman into our home and expected me to welcome her. You don't get to lecture me about going behind someone's back." His face hardened. "You think you're better than me because you make more money?" There it was. The thing he had been hiding underneath every argument for years. It was never about the late meetings. It was never about my clothes. It was never about how much time I spent at work. He hated that I had become financially independent enough that I didn't need him. This was never about money, I said. It was about control. He looked away. I loved you. Maybe you did, I said. But you stopped respecting me. That sentence seemed to hit him harder than the shouting would have. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where he had once told me I was lucky to have him. Can we fix this? He asked. 6 weeks earlier, that question would have destroyed me. That night it didn't. No, I said. Not the way you want. I moved into the guest room that night. The next morning I called Laura. She told me to change the passwords on every account I controlled, secure copies of all financial documents, and avoid emotional conversations with Daniel without someone else aware of what was happening. I did exactly that. Within a week, Daniel started changing his behavior. The anger disappeared. The charm returned. He bought flowers. He left handwritten notes on the kitchen counter. He told me Vanessa was gone and that he'd made a terrible mistake. Then he changed tactics. He started saying he had been depressed. He said he felt like he had failed as a husband because I was more successful. He asked me to remember the good years. He even brought up the miscarriage, telling me he thought losing the baby had changed me. That was the moment I finally understood how dangerous emotional manipulation could be. He wasn't apologizing for hurting me. He was searching for an explanation that would make me responsible for what he had done. I told him once, "Your pain can explain your choices. It doesn't excuse them." After that, I stopped arguing. I let the attorney handle the legal conversations. 3 weeks later, Laura found another problem. Daniel had been preparing to sell one of his business properties without telling me, and several payments from our joint account had been routed through his company. It wasn't enough to prove some huge financial crime, but it was enough to show a pattern. He had been separating himself financially while expecting me to stay emotionally trapped. I began building a complete record of everything. Transfers, receipts, messages, mortgage payments. Every detail had a place. And then, one Tuesday morning, Laura called me and said, "Claire, I think you need to sit down before I tell you this." I sat at my desk, opened my notebook and waited. "We found something connected to the house," she said. "And if I'm reading this correctly, Daniel has been planning something much bigger than a divorce." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" He paused. "There is a document filed 6 months ago that you never signed." I stared at the wall. 6 months. That meant Daniel had started planning this before the dinner, before Vanessa, before I even knew there was a problem. "What document?" I asked. Laura's voice became very careful. "A proposed transfer of ownership." I couldn't breathe for a second. Daniel hadn't just been planning to replace me. He had been planning to take control of the one thing I thought was safe. A home. And suddenly, the romantic dinner wasn't the biggest betrayal anymore. It was only the first thing he had allowed me to see. The document Laura found changed everything. Daniel had prepared a transfer agreement that would have moved his interest in our house into a separate business entity he controlled. It hadn't been finalized because my signature was required, but he had already started the process. I sat at Laura's office staring at the copy while she explained what it meant. Daniel hadn't just been planning a romantic dinner with Vanessa. He had been preparing for a future where I would walk away with as little as possible while he kept the house and the business. I looked at the date on the document again. 6 months earlier. He was planning this before I even knew Vanessa existed, I said. Laura nodded. That's what the paperwork suggests. For the first time, I didn't feel heartbroken. Felt clear. I signed the documents Laura put in front of me, and the divorce process began. Daniel reacted exactly as I expected. First came anger, then apologies, then promises, then threats disguised as concern. He told me I was destroying 11 years of marriage over one mistake. I reminded him that the dinner wasn't one mistake. The hotel wasn't one mistake. The money wasn't one mistake. The secret transfer wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern. He had simply assumed I would keep forgiving him because I had forgiven him before. But this time I had evidence. During the next few months, every hidden detail came to light. The $12,500 transfer was documented. The hotel charges were documented. The jewelry purchase was documented. The payments to Vanessa were documented. Even the business transfers were reviewed. Daniel tried to claim some of the money had been legitimate business expenses, but the records told a different story. Susan, his mother, eventually gave Laura a statement confirming that Daniel had lied to her about the money he borrowed and the reason for the loan. That hurt him more than I expected. He had always believed his mother would protect him. He didn't. She told the truth. The settlement took months, but when it was finally resolved, I kept the house. Daniel had to refinance his share of the property, and because I had paid the larger portion of the mortgage during the final years of our marriage, the settlement reflected those contributions. He also had to account for the money he had moved without my knowledge. It wasn't the dramatic courtroom revenge story someone might imagine. There was no judge shouting at him. No public humiliation. No perfect movie moment. It was paperwork, signatures, bank statements, attorney meetings, and facts. And somehow that made the victory feel even better. Because facts didn't care about Daniel's excuses. They didn't care that he cried. They didn't care that he said he had been confused. They didn't care that he suddenly remembered all the good things about our marriage. Facts simply sat there and told the truth. 6 months after that dinner, Daniel moved out. The last night he was in the house, he stood by the front door holding a box of his things. He looked around the living room and said, "I never thought it would end like this." I almost told him that neither did I. Instead I said, "Neither did I." He looked at me for a long moment. "Was there ever a chance you would have forgiven me?" Thought about it. Once, yes. If he had admitted the truth before I found it. If he had apologized without blaming my career. If he had asked for help instead of asking another woman to sit at our dinner table. Maybe. But the man standing in front of me wasn't the man I had married. He had spent months showing me who he really was. "I think I would have forgiven a mistake," I said. "I couldn't forgive a plan." He nodded slowly, picked up his box and walked out. I closed the door behind him. Then I stood there in silence. No music. No dramatic tears. Just the sound of the lock clicking into place. For the first time in 11 years, the house was completely mine. A week later, I repainted the dining room. I replaced the old curtains. I moved the table closer to the window. Then I put away the wine glasses Daniel had chosen for our anniversary. I didn't throw them away. I simply stopped letting them remind me of him. Susan still calls me sometimes. First, I thought that would feel strange. But she told me something I'll never forget. "Claire, I thought I was losing a daughter-in-law," she said. But I realized I was finally getting to know the woman my son kept underestimating. That meant more to me than she probably realized. As for Vanessa, I never contacted her again. I don't hate her. She walked into a story Daniel had written for her, just as I once lived inside a story I thought was true. The difference was that when she learned the truth, she walked away. I stayed long enough to make sure the truth couldn't be rewritten. Sometimes I still think about that Friday night. I remember Daniel standing at the door, convinced he was about to begin a new life. I remember Vanessa holding that bottle of wine. I remember the look on his face when she realized he had lied to her too. But most of all, I remember what happened after the door closed. Daniel thought opening that door would bring Vanessa into our marriage. Instead, it opened a door he could never close again. It opened the truth. It opened the end of our marriage. And it opened the beginning of my life without him. These days, I still have Friday night dinners. Sometimes I invite Megan. Sometimes Susan comes over. Sometimes I eat alone with a book beside me and music playing softly in the background. And every once in a while, I make the same lemon chicken Daniel used to love. The first time I made it after he left, I almost laughed because it tasted different. Not because the recipe had changed. 'Cause I had. I used to think a home was the person sitting across the table from you. Now I know better. A home is the place where you don't have to make yourself smaller to keep someone else comfortable. Daniel opened a door that night expecting another woman to walk into my life and push me out of it. Instead, he opened the door to the truth. And I was the one who finally walked through it.